The vote finished at the 14th bell, Sorveth Standard, and the chamber gave a sound I had not expected. Not cheering, not the sharp percussion of their approval staffs, but a low collective exhalation, the sound of a body releasing a long-held breath. 61 senators. Not one dissent. The war declaration against humanity was ratified by unanimous consent of the Sorveth Deliberative Senate, and the presiding arbiter, a pale four-armed elder named Dross Ven, set his seal to the instrument with the calm of a man signing a routine transit permit. I watched from the gallery's lower tier, third seat from the aisle, the way I had watched every session for the past 9 months. My name was Cord Mallan, and my official designation was Senior Diplomatic Security Attaché, which meant I carried the briefcase, kept the schedule, and made sure the senior envoy's water glass was filled. It also meant that when the senior envoy, Ambassador Lyra Voss, had been recalled to Earth 6 weeks ago under what the Senate had classified as a procedural irregularity, which was their language for an expulsion they lacked the nerve to name plainly, I was the only human left with recognized standing in this chamber. Standing, not authority. They had been careful to make that distinction twice in writing. The arbiter's aide read the instrument aloud for the record. Article 9 of the Sorveth Consolidated Defense Accords, invoked under the clause governing hostile non-compliance by a treaty-registered signatory. Earth had been classified hostile non-compliant 4 months ago, when we declined to surrender survey rights over the Vethran Outer Belt. The classification had sat in a committee file since then, not because the Senate was uncertain, but because they were waiting for the chamber to fill. Today it was full. Every delegated species had sent its senior representative. The Pelrath bloc had brought 2. They wanted witnesses. I understood that. A war declaration without an audience is just paperwork. A war declaration with 61 signatures and a full gallery is a message, and the message was this: humanity had overreached, humanity had been warned, and now humanity would learn what it meant to stand against the weight of the Sorveth Consolidated. The arbiter set down his seal and looked up at the gallery. His 4 eyes moved across the rows of observers, the Keth trade delegates, the Variety Scientific Commission, the junior staffers from a dozen member worlds, and finally settled on me. The human observer is noted as present, he said. The record reflects that notification has been received in person. That was the other reason they had wanted me here. Under Article 9, notification of a war declaration had to be delivered to a recognized representative of the named party within the same session. If no representative was present, the Senate was required to transmit formally and wait 14 days for acknowledgement. With me in the gallery, the clock started now. I nodded once. The arbiter returned to his dais. Around me, the gallery observers had begun speaking to each other in low tones. The Pelrath senior delegate had already produced a communication device. I heard the words Fleet Mobilization Corridor from somewhere to my left, and recognized the voice as belonging to one of the Keth observers, which was interesting, because the Keth had no stake in Sorveth military movements unless they had already been promised something on the other side of this. The Senate floor had not emptied. The senators sat in their curved tiers, some reviewing documents, some in quiet conversation, all of them waiting, I realized, for me to do something. To protest. To demand a recess. To invoke an emergency consultation clause. To show, in some visible way, that humanity was caught unprepared. I reached under my seat and picked up the briefcase. It was a plain thing. Dark grey composite, scratched at both lower corners from 9 months of chamber floors and security checkpoints. The Senate scanning team had cleared it when I entered, as they cleared it every session. They had found nothing unusual, because there was nothing unusual to find. The document inside was exactly what it appeared to be, a sealed diplomatic instrument, registered in the Sorveth Treaty Archive 17 years ago, under the signature of the original human delegation and countersigned by 3 sitting senators who had since retired. I stood. The gallery went quieter. A few senators on the floor looked up. I walked to the gallery rail, descended the side stair to the chamber floor, a path I had taken 100 times to carry water, to pass notes, to collect the ambassador's forgotten reading materials, and crossed the open marble to the Senate rostrum. My footsteps were the loudest sound in the room. I set the briefcase on the rostrum shelf, opened it, removed the document, and placed it flat on the surface in front of the arbiter station. The arbiter looked at it, then at me. Attaché Mallan, he said, you do not hold response authority. This chamber has been notified of your status. I closed the briefcase. Attaché. I picked it up, turned, and walked back toward the gallery stair. You are required to identify the nature of that instrument. I kept walking. Behind me, I heard the arbiter speak to his aide, heard the rustle of the document being lifted, heard the aide begin to read aloud, quietly at first, then stopping, then beginning again from the top, louder. I was at the stair when the first senator stood up. I was through the gallery door when the second one did. The document was a counterclause instrument. It had been drafted by Earth's legal team during the original treaty negotiations 17 years ago, buried in Annex 7 of the Consolidated Signatory Accords, subsection on mutual defense obligations of registered parties. The language was dense and technical and written in the Sorveth administrative dialect that no one outside the treaty archive staff read voluntarily, which was why no sitting senator had read it in full, and why the three who had countersigned it had done so as part of a batch of routine annexes on a long afternoon of closing ceremonies. What it said, stripped of the procedural lattice, was this: in the event that a Sorveth Senate war declaration was issued against a treaty-registered signatory without that signatory having first exhausted the mandatory mediation sequence defined in Annex 4, the signatory retained the right to treat the declaration as a material breach of the Consolidated Accords, and to invoke immediate mutual defense protocol with any other registered party of its choosing, without further Senate approval. The mandatory mediation sequence in Annex 4 required a minimum of 42 standard days of formal process. The Senate had skipped it entirely. They had skipped it because they had not believed it mattered. Earth was one signatory among 61. The mediation clause was a procedural formality that no one invoked, because no one who had ever been subject to a Sorveth War declaration had possessed the standing or the resources to invoke it meaningfully. The clause had been in the archive for 17 years. It had never been tested. Earth had spent 4 of those 17 years quietly identifying which other registered parties might be interested in a mutual defense relationship, and the past 14 months positioning 12 of its fastest courier vessels in Sorveth-adjacent space, carrying sealed copies of pre-negotiated mutual defense instruments with 6 of those parties, waiting for a trigger. The war declaration was the trigger. I learned what happened in the chamber after I left from a Keth observer who filed a detailed account with his trade counsel, a copy of which reached Earth's intelligence desk 11 days later. The aide finished reading the document aloud. The arbiter asked for a treaty archive specialist to be summoned. The specialist arrived and confirmed the instrument's registration date and countersignature validity. A senator from the Pelrath bloc asked whether the mediation sequence had been completed. No one answered immediately. The archive specialist pulled Annex 4 and read the sequence requirements. The arbiter asked when the sequence had been initiated. It had not been initiated. The Article 9 mobilization order, the arbiter was informed, could not be executed while a material breach challenge was active under the Consolidated Accords. The Senate's own legal framework had suspended its own war declaration. 3 senators asked simultaneously whether the human attaché could be recalled to the chamber. I was already in a courier vessel, outbound on the Vethran corridor approach, carrying confirmation to Admiral Sen Voratha's prepositioned fleet that the trigger had been received and the mutual defense instruments were now active. The Admiral's standing orders were to hold position, take no aggressive action, and be visible. 12 human warships, stationary, in legal transit through the Vethran outer belt under mutual defense cover from 6 registered Sorveth parties. Cover that the Senate itself had ratified and could not revoke without the consent of those parties. They sent a formal communication to Earth's Transit Relay Station 9 hours later, requesting clarification of the attaché's authority level. Earth's relay station sent back a single line: "The instrument speaks for itself." They sent a second communication requesting emergency mediation. Earth's relay station acknowledged receipt. I don't know what the Senate floor looked like in the days that followed. I know what the settlement looked like, because I was in the room when Ambassador Voss signed it 6 weeks later. Survey rights confirmed, the war declaration withdrawn from the record, the material breach finding noted in the permanent archive. The arbiter had aged, I thought. His movements were more deliberate. He signed his copy of the settlement without looking up. The war had lasted 11 seconds on paper. It had never left the chamber. It had never needed to. Lyra Voss did not say anything to me afterward that I would call triumphant. What she said, standing outside the chamber while the Sorveth aides filed the settlement copies, was quiet and precise, the way she said most things. Cord, did they ever ask you what was in the case? The arbiter asked me to identify the instrument. And I left. She looked at the chamber doors for a moment. Then she picked up her own briefcase and walked toward the transit corridor. I have thought about those 11 seconds more than I should, probably. 61 votes cast in certainty. A gallery full of witnesses brought in to watch humanity absorb the weight of a unanimous chamber. And what they watched instead was a man in a grey coat cross a marble floor, set a piece of paper on a rostrum, close a briefcase, and walk out a door. 17 years of patience, filed under Annex 7, in a dialect no one reads. The Sorveth Senate had wanted witnesses. In the end, they got one.